Hello, welcome to a very fun video. I actually feel like ever since I started my YouTube channel, I have been wanting to do more decade videos. I've done like defining a decade before, which I did for the early 2000s and the 2010s, but clearly we're talking about a decade that I was not alive in right now. So I felt like I couldn't necessarily say defining a decade like I've done in the past. But with that all said, I have listened to music from various decades, as many people do, most of my life. And the 80s in general, culturally, fashion wise, like it is just this, in my opinion, it just appeared to be this very like bigger is better and more is more kind of era. Just a lot was going on in the 80s. And I wanted to break it into two videos talking about some of my favorite songs from the 1980s. We're going to start with 80 to 84 today. This is not going to be done in a particular order of like my top 10, but more so I'm going to start at 1980 and go year by year. And I tell you what, as I was making this list could have been 25 songs long. We're going to go ahead and start with 1980. And I only have one song for this year. And it is actually a song that I have always loved. And I did not realize it actually was released in the 80s. And that is ABBA's The Winner Takes It All. I'm a girl who loves ABBA. I always have loved ABBA. ABBA was a part of my growing up music that I heard. And The Winner Takes It All is a very different kind of turn of popular song. If you look at ABBA, a lot of people think of like Dancing Queen, Super Trooper, like Gimme, 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 oh man, like these more fast-paced, very disco pop influenced tracks. And The Winner Takes It All is an emotional, just sad song ballad. And I think it's beautiful. I've always liked it. I thought it was beautiful. I love the backing vocals on it. Wonderful melody. The piano gets me on it. Dun, 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 dun. Like, come on. I love it. So happy to see that was a 1980 song, and that is covering the year 1980 for me. 1981, we've got a song with two very big names, and I'm going to go ahead and say there are some artists that are missing from this top 10 that I wanted to include, like Lionel Richie, Stevie Wonder, certain people come to mind. And I did try and not do too much rock on this list. I kind of was keeping it more on the pop side of things because once again, that's a whole other video that should be made if we're going to talk about rock music from the 80s. But this one we're going to let slide, and that's Under Pressure with Queen and David Bowie, because Queen in the 80s definitely still had rock as their core, I would say, but nothing like the 70s. Queen was a band that really started to do more pop rock music, and I think Under Pressure is a wonderful example of you feel that rock flair, but that is a pop radio track that people love to this day. And what a combo. David Bowie, Queen. It's a beautiful duet. And Queen is another group I could make an entire list for from the 80s. Love Queen, as well as David Bowie, honestly. 1982, we have two tracks. This is the only song from this group that I would probably include in any of my personal 80s top songs list, and that is Africa by TOTO. What is in the water with that song? I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the building of harmonies on the chorus, but I have always loved singing along to this. And fun fact, I do remember in high school, for some reason, this was like my high school choir's go-to track to perform, which I think is hysterical. I mean, I wasn't in choir, but I had a lot of friends in choirs, so it got sung around me a lot, and it kind of became a joke. But at the core of it, it's a really good song. Like, I think it is so fun to just belt out along to, play in the car, never gets old. And then my second track from 1982, this is an artist that I have made a whole video for way back when. Michael Jackson had so much incredible music in the early 80s. I literally could make a video for just these like 5 years worth of music for him and ranking. So I just personally put down my absolute favorite track from him. It's not Beat It. It's not Billie Jean. It's Human Nature. Gosh, like Human Nature, although popular, I mean, it's not at the level, I would say, of popularity as some of like, as like a Beat It or Billie Jean from that era. But Human Nature is to this day one of the most gorgeous songs I think I have ever heard. I think the vocals are beautiful with the music and the melody. It's just an incredibly touching song. I don't know. It's always just really got me. Anytime I've listened to Human Nature, it's just always really made me feel so at peace. I think it might be one of my favorite vocals from Michael Jackson too. I really just find it to be such a beautiful, beautiful track. Okay, 1983. 83 and 84 are just, they were filled with tracks that I really love from the 80s. So in 1983, we've got 4 songs. Let's start with Jump for My Love by the Pointer Sisters. This one came to me into my life probably the most recently. And when I say most recently, I'm talking still like 10 years ago. I actually first heard this song, I think it was in a Just Dance video game, and I loved it so much. And then I've also seen the movie Love Actually, and there's a very iconic dance scene with it. But ever since then, I have listened to the original Jump for My Love by the Pointer Sisters, and I just think it is such a feel-good, wonderful 80s song. And I literally love to just listen to it when I want to be put in a good mood, quite honestly. So I knew I wanted to include it. Now, this might be the most like rock kind of track that I have on this list, and this is Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. Let's talk about her for a second, because I also really enjoyed the song Holding Out for a Hero. And one thing that Bonnie Tyler gives in those songs is just an absolute aggression and emotion. I mean, it's kind of what I said. The 80s were about the extremes. Her style of music, I think, really presents that very well. Like, it is full throttle in your face. And Total Eclipse of the Heart puts the power in power ballad. At some points in the song, she's literally just like yelling, it feels like. It's just this agony. It's just so classic sounding and defining what like an 80s song can sound like. Like another song from 83 is an artist that was mentioned earlier in the video, David Bowie's Let's Dance. I love that song. Once again, David Bowie throws in a little bit more of a pop flair in there, as a lot of people were doing in the 80s, and it works incredibly well. Like, it still has a uniqueness to it that you're like, oh yeah, this sounds like Bowie, without it being Starman or any of his other a bajillion songs that came out in the 70s. And I have listened to that song for years and years and years, and I don't really skip it when it comes up. Now, remember how I said earlier in this video that I could make a whole list of just songs I love from Elton John in the 80s, because there are so many. But this one in particular has been a go-to song for me in general ever since I was like 10 years old, which is kind of funny when I think about it. But anyway, I guess that's why they call it the blues. This song has the beautiful, obviously it says blues in the title, but it does have that blues flair to it. It's a little bit of a different sound sonically than what you normally get from Elton John. Well, yes and no. Elton's always kind of been open to going down the more like blues or soul sort of path, but I digress. I guess that's why they call it the blues. I think it's just a wonderful mid-tempo sad song. Love the music arrangement on it. And I know some people might be like, you picked that over I'm Still Standing. Like, no, clearly I'm Still Standing is the more commercially popular Elton John song that came from this era. But me personally, although I absolutely love and adore that song, let's not get it twisted. I guess that's why they call it the blues. It's always had a very special place in my heart. So now we're on to 84, and let's start with Prince had Purple Rain go down in this era. Like the movie, the album, Prince and the Revolution. It's all so fantastic. And it's like, how do I pick just one Prince song? So in the end, I went with the all-time classic, Purple Rain. Almost went Let's Go Crazy. It still kind of hurts that I'm not including Let's Go Crazy on this list, but I had to pick one. So Purple Rain it is, because you can't beat it. You cannot top that track. The music break in the song, the guitar solo, Prince's vocals. It's a classic. The ending, the outro, I love where this song goes. It's a wonderful journey that you go on the song with very classic builds, but still has this Prince flair that cannot be replicated. It's an absolute banger, absolute classic, and there was no way I could not include it. And finally, you cannot talk about the 80s, the early 80s, without talking about Wham. Wake Me Up Before You Go Go was also released in 1984, and I have said it once, I've said it twice, 3 times, so many times, but I'm going to say it again. I absolutely love the sound of George Michael's voice. I've always loved it. He is one of those people that I wish I would have been able to have seen performed live, because I think he was a wonderful live vocalist as well. And I mean, same with Prince. Those are 2 artists that I really wish I would have had the opportunity to have seen live. And Wake Me Up Before You Go Go is classic 80s pop. I feel like if anyone has a heart, you can't hear that song and not feel at least a smidge better. It just always makes me feel a little bit better if I'm having like a bad day or something and I hear that song. It's going to help me out. Between the melody and his vocal on it, it's fabulous. I love it. As I said at the start of the video, there are so many songs I wanted to include. And in fact, I'm going to list some honorable mentions that were on my final short list before I made the final list right here. And I'll keep them here as I'm talking. 80s was just filled with a lot of Hairspray, a lot of perms, and a lot of really good music. And I think what's so fun to do this now is, I've said it previously, but in the last, I'd say maybe 4 years in particular, I have seen a dramatic uptick of 80s pop influence in today's pop music. And I think there's good reason for that. It's because it's addictive, and emotionally, I feel like 80s music was so big and grand, or took it to extremes, whether it was like you're sad or happy, angry, angsty, like it doesn't matter. It just encompassed such huge feelings, and people, I think, really were so invested in the music. There's like an addictiveness about it that made artists now want to go back and revisit, you know, those sounds and those synths and the different like tempos and melodies and such. Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite tracks are from the early 80s. And if you enjoyed this video, let me know if you'd like to see a part 2. Am more than ready to film a part 2 talking about the second half of the 80s. Thank you for watching this video, especially if you made it till the very end. And until my next video, bye.